Great Northern War by Kings in General. The Battle of Narva, 1700. Let's go. Starting a new series. This won the voting system, so we hope you guys enjoy.
Oh,
yeah.
Let's go.
I'm going to only start dropping it when we have all 6 episodes, so you'll get them all. Sometimes.
Oh, fucking Christ.
Is it loud?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no one cares about your
The Great
ears.
Northern War
They just care
marks the
about
culmination of the tumultuous past couple of centuries in Northern Europe. This war not only changed the balance of power in the region, but on the continent as a whole. At the end of the conflict, one of Europe's newest and most militarized powers lay in ruins, and from its ashes, an empire previously on the fringe of European affairs would start its explosive rise. In this episode, we will talk about the events that led to the beginning of the Great Northern War, and cover the Battle of Narva, one of the most interesting engagements of the era.
Okay, starting
Speaking
off
of
with the
interesting,
interesting
the sponsor of the
Yeah.
The ascension of Gustavus Adolphus to the throne of Sweden in 1611 is generally regarded as the starting point of the Swedish Empire. The able young king inherited a multitude of conflicts in the region, most notably the Ingrian War against the Tsardom of Russia. The war was concluded with the Peace of Stolbovo in 1618, which stipulated that Sweden would gain Ingria and parts of Karelia, thereby denying Russia access to the Baltic Sea.
Nice.
Russia, which was still recovering from the time of troubles, was unable to offer any significant resistance to Swedish expansion.
Yeah, they're not going to be happy with that, are they?
The war with Poland-Lithuania, which had been sporadically raging on since 1600, was concluded in 1629. Gustavus Adolphus was not able to force Sigismund III of Poland to renounce his claims on the Swedish throne, but he was able to keep most of Livonia, including the important port city of Riga, and gain valuable trade concessions.
Nice.
In 1618, one of the most destructive conflicts in history, the 30 Years' War, had started as well. Although the last phases of the Swedish-Polish War are considered to be a part of the 30 Years' War, the Kingdom of Sweden did not involve itself directly in the war before the King of Denmark, the former champion of Protestantism, had been defeated. Worried about Catholic domination in the empire, Gustavus Adolphus, who was a leader of a Protestant nation himself, intervened on the Protestant side. Although the Catholics were close to a complete victory, the Swedish involvement changed the tides of the war. Sweden's superior army dominated the battlefield even after the death of Gustavus, and by 1648, the war was grinding down to a stalemate. Large parts of Europe, especially the Holy Roman Empire, were left decimated, demographically, economically, and militarily. In contrast, the Kingdom of Sweden, by acquiring territories in Pomerania and Bremen-Verden at the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, became the preeminent power in the Baltic region and one of Europe's leading states.
Okay.
Sweden may have been the dominant power in Northern and Eastern Europe. However, its supremacy in the Baltic was incomplete. Only several years after the Peace of Westphalia, they went to war against Poland in what became known as the Deluge. Even though the Swedes were dominating for most of the war, by the end, the coalition assembled against them proved to be too difficult to deal with, and peace was signed. The peace was a merely symbolic victory for Sweden, as the Polish monarchs finally abandoned their claim to the Swedish throne. Moreover, it also proved that the Kingdom of Sweden could not survive for too long against an organized coalition of enemies.
Okay.
Charles XI ascended to the throne of Sweden in 1660, and the majority of his rule was peaceful, barring the relatively short Scanian War of 1675 to 1679. During the war, Sweden conquered Scania from Denmark, but lost some of its lands in Germany, mostly due to the inefficiency of the army. After the war, Charles XI revitalized the economy and administration of Sweden. However, his most notable reforms were of a military nature. Those reforms aimed to make the Swedish army one of the best in Europe.
Okay, that's fair.
So
Charles
Sabaton
XI's
did a
death
whole
in
album about this
1697
Yeah.
left his only son, Charles XII, as the new Swedish king.
Okay.
As Charles XII was barely 15 at the time, Peter I of Russia and Christian V of Denmark saw this as an ideal opportunity to exploit Sweden's apparent weakness. On the 21st of April 1699, Russia and Denmark concluded a treaty of mutual assistance in future wars against Sweden. One of the secret articles of the treaty, however, stipulated that Russia would only join the war after it made peace with the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, okay.
Shortly afterwards, Peter concluded a treaty with Augustus of Saxony, who was also the elected ruler of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Augustus was a very proud and extravagant ruler, and his main goal was to return Livonia to the Commonwealth. Livonia, although a land that brought insurmountable wealth to the Swedish crown, was also a source of great concern. After Sweden had gained Livonia in 1629 through the Treaty of Altmark, it gave certain assurances to the old Livonian nobility that they would preserve the rights that they had had under the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth,
Did they stick to
and
it?
that they would not lose any of the lands that were in their possession.
Oh, no.
For the first couple of decades, the relationship
Couple
between
decades?
the Swedish monarchs
Long
and the
time.
Livonian nobility was amicable. Charles X, however, was not as lenient as his predecessors, and by 1655 he intended to revoke a quarter of the lands that belonged to the Livonian nobility, only with the Second Northern War preventing him from doing so.
Yeah, they weren't happy
Charles
about
XI
that, were
would
they?
turn his father's plans
Oh,
into a reality after
Yep.
ascending to the throne, and
Shit.
by the time of his death in 1697, the Livonian nobility held only a fifth of the original number of estates. One of the nobles, Johann Reinhold Patkul, outraged by the Great Reduction, agitated the Livonian nobility to rise up against Sweden in rebellion. He
course,
was swiftly
they wanna go
arrested
back to
and
the
sentenced to
Commonwealth.
death, and to avoid execution, Patkul fled from Sweden.
Nice.
Patkul later played a key role in the formation of the anti-Swedish coalition, as he was usually the diplomatic link between Peter, Augustus and Christian, and provided intelligence on the Swedish defences in the Baltic.
It was a mole.
Sensing the impending danger, Charles XII sent diplomats to Russia in the summer of 1699, with the goal of confirming a peace treaty between the two states from 1661. A skillful diplomat, Peter the Great assured the envoys of his peaceful intentions, but in reality he had already decided to go to war. Augustus II also sent a diplomatic envoy to Sweden, assuring the king of his friendly intentions and asking for Swedish mediation in a dispute between himself and Prussia. While all of these
a ploy,
dialogues
right?
took place, the coalition continued its preparations for war. Ultimately, the Duke of Holstein-Gottorp became alarmed by the Danish naval buildup and informed his ally Charles XII of what had been transpiring. Though both the Swedes and Holstein had tried to resolve the matter peacefully, the new King of Denmark, Frederick IV, refused to negotiate.
So they know.
The
Enough
first
is
act
enough.
of war was committed by Frederick's troops in March of 1700, when the Danish army entered lands belonging to the Duke of Holstein, and shortly afterwards laid siege to Turning. Simultaneously, on the other side of the Baltic Sea, Saxon forces under Augustus entered Livonia and captured the port of Dunemunda. Charles XII, together with his war council, seeing the Danish threat as more immediate, decided to strike at them first.
Ooh, okay.
Great Britain and the Netherlands were uneasy at the prospect of a destructive war in the Baltic, as they had trade interests in the region. Fearing that the conflict might destabilize their economies, the maritime powers deployed their fleets to Øresund to ensure that no lasting harm to trade and their merchants would be done. By August,
It makes sense, really.
We parked our shits up next to their ships and was like, shoot this way and hit us, and we get involved. Do you want that? No, turn your guns away.
Copenhagen's a really nice place.
Just, yeah. It's kind of you're doing your thing, but if a cannon hits our shit, we get involved. It's what the Americans do now.
And I've done it for many years.
Literally just park your ships next to the things you want and go, well, no, we're not protecting them. we're just hit. But if we get hit, then now you've hit us.
Can't lose the tea.
I see you. You haven't liked the video yet. Why not? Go on. Go like it. While you're at it, you know you want to subscribe. And if you want to go to our social medias, all the links you need are in the description box down below. And you might as well head over to our Patreon as well, where you can get extra bonus content if you're enjoying this. That link's in the description box down below. But we'll get straight back into the video. Love you guys.
A Swedish force of 16,000 had assembled in Scania. Though attacking the main Danish army and lifting the siege of Tønning seemed like the most secure way to deal a decisive defeat to Frederick IV, Charles opted for the riskier option of attacking the Danish mainland itself. The Swedish fleet, with Charles himself and his troops on board, managed to outmaneuver their more formidable Danish counterpart and make contact with the British and Dutch fleet. The maritime powers were willing to assist the Swedish king, so the Danish fleet was forced to retreat to Copenhagen. Skillfully avoiding parts of the island's coastal battery present, Swedish troops subsequently disembarked on Zealand. The Danish mustered up around 700 men and 7 artillery pieces to attack the Swedish disembarking forces. However, they were no match for the 2,500 Swedish soldiers led by Charles himself. It was here that Charles XII saw battle for the first time and proved himself an excellent leader, being the first one to jump into the water and lead the result.
Okay.
The Danish were caught completely by surprise with this move and were starting to panic, as the Swedish army was within a stone's throw of their capital. A few days after Charles set foot on Zealand, more Swedish soldiers landed there as well, and preparations were made for the march on Copenhagen. Meanwhile, the Swedish, Dutch and British fleets blockaded and started bombarding Copenhagen from the sea. With Copenhagen surrounded on both land and sea, Frederick IV of Denmark made peace with the Duke of Holstein-Gottorp, and peace with Sweden was achieved soon afterwards as well. On the 18th of August 1700, the same day that peace was made between Denmark and Sweden, Peter I of Russia declared war on Sweden and began his offensive into Ingria.
Oh no.
The first target of Peter the Great's campaign was Narva, a crucial fort near the Baltic Sea. Peter besieged Narva with an army more than 30,000 strong and with more than 150 cannons. Such an artillery force would have reduced Narva to rubble, were it not for the fact that the Russians suffered from a lack of ammunition due to bad roads.
Once again,
with
logistics
trouble
being
brewing
big
in the west, in what would become the War of the Spanish Succession, the fleet of the maritime powers transported the Swedish army back to the mainland before setting sail westwards. As the Swedish army was fully united, Charles was able to set sail for Livonia. Though Dunamunda fell to Saxon forces quickly and with little resistance, Patkul gravely misjudged the loyalty and intentions of the Livonian nobility. He had expected the Livonian nobility to join Augustus and Riga to fall quickly too. However, Livonian support was minimal, and Saxon forces alone were not strong enough to take the city. Learning of the Danish defeat, Augustus II retreated across the Dunaj River in hopes that Charles would agree to a ceasefire.
Catholic?
Charles arrived with a part of his army in autumn. As Augustus retreated beyond the Dunaj River for winter quarters, Charles decided to head towards Narva and the Russian army. The rest of the Swedish War Council, along with foreign emissaries, tried to persuade Charles to postpone the attack on the Russian army until after the winter had passed and the army was united. Charles, however, wished nothing other than to meet his enemy in open battle, and not even the knowledge of the size of the Russian army could dissuade him. While marching towards Narva on the 7th of November, a part of the Swedish army clashed with a Russian raiding party under the command of Boris Sheremetyev at Jõhvi. Although the Russian raiding party suffered relatively heavy casualties compared to the Swedish ones, General Sheremetyev became aware of how far the Swedish army was from Narva. On the 18th of November, Charles XII arrived with his army at the village of Lagena, about 8 kilometers away from
Fuck
Narva.
being in that village,
Seeing
bro.
that many of the horses were ill,
You're just
and that
chilling
there was
in the
heavy
winter
snowfall,
time.
he
Fire
knew he
on,
needed to
logs
act
burning.
quickly. As soon as he was certain
And then you
that
look out
Narva
the
had
window.
not fallen
people
and that his
coming
men
past.
were ready,
Just don't-
Charles left Lagena.
Just don't come in.
Just keep walking.
Just keep walking.
Meanwhile, the Russians, being aware that the Swedish army was on its way, began defensive preparations. Trenches were dug around the Narva River's meander,
Okay.
and wooden stakes were placed in the center on the Goldenhof Hill. There were 2 rows of ramparts running alongside the trench as well, and between them there were soldiers' barracks. Several artillery batteries were placed along the trenches, although they would not have any effect on the battle, as the Russian army ran out of ammunition several weeks before.
Okay.
Sources differ when it comes to the exact.
How?
Right, lads.
How?
Get all the cannons up on the wall, and over there, it's about 200 metres, it's shit mud, just get every single cannon over there. We ain't got no fucking cannonballs, you dickhead. I know. Get them the fuck on the wall. If they see them and they run, fucking Zolt. And what happens if they don't? Well, fucking do what you do to survive, dickhead.
I'd be fuming, cuz.
Mate, you see that?
I'd be fuming.
I would shit my pants walking up there and just think, right, the second them cannons are low with fact.
No, because I would see the cannons being the first point of live fire at, like, they're not supposed to be there. You would have them behind. It's artillery. You'd have them behind on a hill. I'd go, Jack, there's no one operating those fuckers. Let's go.
There's people there though. I'd be crawling through the mud at night just going, don't see me, don't see me, don't see me.
They could get pincered here. This looks horrible.
It's-
If the people from the castle, if there's a strong enough force, come out, like,
I don't know.
it could go wrong.
It
We'll see.
seems like it's going to go wrong regardless.
Yeah, it does, yeah. But the Russians are just making blunder after blunder here.
exact size of the Russian army, but modern estimates agree that they had between 35,000 and 40,000 men at their disposal, with the overwhelming majority being infantry. The Russian forces were stretched for over 6 kilometers on their side of the trenches. The Russian army was under the general command of Peter
That's a good front
I
line.
and Field Marshal Fyodor Golovin.
Long though.
The right wing of the Russian forces were commanded by General Avtonom Golovin, the center by Ivan Trubetskoy, and the left by Adam Verde. The Russian cavalry, placed on the far side of their left wing, near the bank of the Narva River, was commanded by Boris Sheremetyev. The Swedes had around 9,000 men, out of which 5,500 were grenadiers, 3,500 dragoon cavalry, and 37 cannons. The army was split into 2
Didn't they say
relatively equal
30,000 for the
parts.
other side?
The right wing
35 to
contained
40,000.
3,000 grenadiers
Remember,
and was
they've got
commanded
no
by Otto
cannons.
Welling, a veteran of the Scanian War.
They've got
It was divided
double,
into 3
triple the
columns,
number.
with the one in the
ridiculous,
centre
Jack.
being smaller and being
More-
hollow
at
in the
least
middle.
double the number. No, it's
The
more like
left
triple
wing
the
was
number.
divided into 2 groups,
Yeah.
with one being commanded by Field Marshal Carl Gustav Rientsköld and the other by Magnus Stenbock. Rientsköld had around
They got
1,500 infantry,
Yeah,
divided
they-
into
they
2
have.
columns, while
Also
Stenbock had
Swedes.
1,000 infantry
Yeah,
under his
true.
command. The Swedish cavalry was positioned on the flanks, mostly in order to guard the infantry against Russian flanking maneuvers. Charles XII himself led the cavalry on the left flank.
Okay.
The Swedish Artillery Corps, under the command of Johan Hublad, had 16 artillery
Johan
pieces
Hublad.
placed in between the left and
Great
right
name.
wing of the army, and 21 were positioned on the left wing. Moving his army through the forest and barely passable trails, Charles reached the outskirts of Narva and positioned himself on Germansberg Hill. After performing reconnaissance of
closer
the
than I
Russian
thought he was
defences,
gonna get.
at 10 a.m. on the
Slow
19th,
start.
Charles
Yeah.
positioned his army in
Oh,
preparation
shit, he's
for
well
battle.
close.
He was
But at the same
hoping
time,
to meet Peter on the battlefield.
have to worry about
However,
the,
the Tsar had left Narva the day
cannons,
before
yeah.
the battle, taking Fyodor Golovin with him. The command of the army was passed to Charles Eugene de Croix, a Saxon diplomatic envoy to Peter. De Croix, aware of his lack of military skill, was initially unwilling to take command of the army. However, it is said that Peter convinced him over a glass of wine. Peter and
That Peter was like, just in case, I don't want nothing to do with the blame. You do it.
Large Merlin.
Like, oh, you have no experience at all. That means you're perfect for the job. I just don't want to get killed by the Tsar.
I'm leaving in the dead of night in the back of that wagon. See ya.
Trubetskoy were just as inexperienced as de Croy was. The most capable Russian commander at Narva was Boris Sheremetyev, although he was passed over for holding a lower rank than the others. The Russian commanders, even though fielding a superior force, were unwilling to commit to open battle, fearing that the Swedish army that they were seeing was merely the vanguard of a much greater unit.
Kind of fair.
Okay.
The battle commenced when Charles ordered his soldiers to fire 2 volleys at their enemies and advance towards the trenches. At 2 p.m, the weather changed. A heavy snowstorm and hailstorm started, and the wind was blowing directly in the face of the Russian soldiers. Using the snowstorm as a screen, Charles ordered his men to fill up the trenches with fascines and start directly assaulting the Russian positions. In less than 15 minutes, the Swedish infantry filled up the trenches enough for their cavalry to pass. The Russian soldiers did not see the Swedes until they were right in front of them.
What?
That's heavy.
The infantry under the command of Rienschold quickly captured the artillery batteries in the center, while the infantry under Stenbock directly assaulted the Russian army.
Strong.
Due to the number of barracks and the bad positioning of the Russian ramparts, the Russian troops did not have much room to maneuver, and brutal close-quarters combat ensued, where the Swedish soldiers had the clear upper hand. Due to the relentless Swedish assault and the surprise of the attack, the majority of the Russian right flank descended into complete disarray. A large number of the soldiers fled towards the bridge to the north. Few managed to escape though, as the bridge collapsed under their weight, taking many men with it to the bottom of the river. Many of the Russian soldiers tried swimming across the ice-cold river as well, with almost all drowning in the process. The soldiers who were left in the trenches also started to flee, only to be forced back by Charles's dragoons. The only part of the Russian right which still posed some organized resistance were the elite Preobrazhensky and Semyonovsky guards. They created a wagon fort on the far side of the Russian right wing, near the Narva River. Continuous assaults against the wagon fort did not yield any results, and the Swedish army suffered heavy casualties. In the meantime, the Swedish right wing saw as much success as the left. The Russian forces were quickly routed, and part of the Swedish right was able to join the left wing shortly afterwards. Sheremetyev, seeing that the cavalry would be useless in this type of close-quarters combat, fled southwards. De Croy, also aware of how dire the situation was, decided to surrender to Charles. As night began to fall, the battle became even more fierce and bloody. Charles drew up many of his footmen in between the city and the entrenchments so that he could not be surprised from any side. Wishing to cut the lines of communication between what was left of the Russian army's wings, Charles ordered Hublot to capture the artillery battery on Goldenhof Hill. By morning, General Golovin surrendered as well. His troops were allowed to keep their arms, as Charles admired the bravery of the 2 elite guards. General Wiede, learning of the surrender of the right wing, subsequently surrendered the left wing. After receiving the arms and standards of the left wing, Charles allowed the rest of the Russian army to leave over the bridge, which his forces had already repaired.
Cheers, bro.
The battle was a catastrophe for the Russians, as their casualties amounted up to 10,000 men, with De Croy and most of the other commanders ending up as prisoners. The Swedish army, on the other hand, lost less than 1,500 men. To make matters worse for the Russians, the Swedes had captured 143 cannons and 28 mortars, almost the entire amount of artillery that Peter the Great had at his disposal, as well as the entire Russian baggage train.
And we will keep and sell.
The Battle of Narva confirmed 2 things to Europe: that the Swedish army was one of the best, and that the Russian army was as ineffective as it was large. Charles XII, merely 18 years of age, proved that he was a more than capable military commander who, backed by an army of as great quality as the Swedish one, could overcome the insurmountable odds that were stacked against him. With the victory at Narva, a complete Swedish victory in the war seemed like a distinct possibility. On the other hand, knowing that his army was merely beginning to reform, Peter the Great was not disheartened, and he famously remarked, "They have beaten us, they might beat us again, but in time they will teach us how to beat them."
Ooh, okay.
Our series on the Great Northern War will continue soon, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series.
Make sure that you are subscribed to their channel and you've got their bell icon.
It's going to be very interesting to watch this.
It is indeed. By going over to their channel, the link's in the description box down below. I'm fucking enjoying it. This is sick. It's been a minute since we've done some Kings in general. I'm looking forward to it. Been a minute indeed. If you enjoyed this reaction, you want to go see reactions early and longer reactions, full versions of it, bonus clips, go to our Patreon. That link's in the description box down below next to Kings and Generals. And of course, you know what you need to do for our video. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we will catch you in the next video.
Toodle pip homies and womies.